Okay, great. There we go. Yeah, just going to give it a couple of seconds to let everyone join. Okay, great. So let's get started. So today we're going to be running through some more GA4 content, having a quick chat about the next element of GA4, which is the migration. So we're going to try and do our best to make it as easy as possible and narrow this down into 5 essential tips that you should be keeping an eye out for as we move closer to the deadline for GA4. So yeah, let's just have a quick look at the agenda. We'll break this down into 3 main steps. First of all, we'll start off with preparation for GA4, having a little discussion about what you have to think about before you actually go onto the platform. Things like understanding exactly what you want to measure and putting that into a measurement plan. We're also going to have a chat about platform migration to GA4. So looking at things like how to set up GA4 on your website, and also touching base on some of the best practices that we've come across here at TAG. And then also we will look at getting started on GA4. There's been quite a lot of changes when you look at Universal Analytics to GA4 in terms of the reporting. So we'll spend a little bit of time getting hands-on with the platform, showing you how to use it, and then also touching base on why you should start measuring from today. So before we get into the slides, if you've got a question, feel free to jump onto our Slido, and at the very end of the webinar, we'll touch base on those questions and answer any that you have. So yeah, let's just start off right at the very start of sort of Google Analytics as we know it. So right away back in 2005, it was called Urchin. It was actually purchased by Google then, and it's went through a few different iterations from there. So Universal Analytics, the one that you know of at the moment, was launched in 2012, 2013. So we're now around about 10 years since there's been any major changes on Universal Analytics. So there's been a lot of time for a lot of bloat in terms of data, in terms of custom reporting, and also user access. You know, so many people come and go in a company, and a lot of the time things like this are forgotten about. It's a security risk, and also from a privacy perspective, when we think of Universal Analytics, it is very bloated. So with the introduction of GA4, it's all about tidying up the data and focusing on what matters most and what is actually going to get us the best returns as marketers. So the first tip that I wanted to touch base on was talking a little bit about how to define your measurement goals. So we'd always recommend putting these into a document, and it will allow you to focus in on what's genuinely important against maybe data or any sort of audience lists that you've got that aren't super relevant. So a good example of this might be if you look into Universal Analytics accounts, chances are you'll have hundreds of different audiences set up, and a lot of the time you might not 100% know exactly what is what. And that's just the nature of the fact that Universal Analytics has been running for so long. And chances are your approach to, for instance, remarketing and just reporting in general has changed quite a lot over the years. So what we would say is use GA4 as an opportunity to have a spring clean. Have a look at what matters most to your business in terms of conversion points. Generally speaking, we're thinking about things like sign-ups, registrations as what we know as macro conversions. And then on the other hand, there's another element to think about nowadays, which is micro conversions. So if someone touches base on your site and downloads, let's say, a brochure download, we should be looking to record that as a conversion. Reason behind that is as time goes on, there'll be less of a reliance on third-party cookies, which means as marketers, we need to rely more heavily on our website and interactions that take place there. So make sure that you're factoring in both micro and macro conversions. So what I wanted to do is just show you a couple of examples of what you can do in terms of setting out your measurement goals. Generally speaking, what we would say is set up a document like a spreadsheet and split up everything into 3 different criteria. So at the very top, you'll have your business objectives, and that's fundamentally what you're graded on in terms of a business. What are the key goals that you're aiming for, what are the outcomes that you want to see. We've also got KPIs, which is a slightly more kind of broken down version of that. So what actually contributes to that business objective. And then probably one of the most important parts when we talk about success metrics and metrics in general on GA4, these are things that actually take place within GA4 which contribute to that. So in some way, we're just creating a chain from top to bottom so that whatever happens on our GA4 account actually has a meaningful impact at the very top. So looking at this example here, let's say that you want to boost your event visitors' attendance. The main KPI you look to measure for that is visitor registrations, but off the back of that, something that you might want to record on your website would be complete visitor reg form. So kind of a very simple example there. We do also have another one which focuses more in on getting exhibitors to your site or to your event, and this one's a little bit different. So in terms of business objectives and KPIs, they line up very similarly to a VisProm visitor. But the key difference here is a lot of the time what you'll find with exhibitors is there might be a brochure download that's worthwhile tracking, and there might be some additional content on the site that if someone downloads that, then they're qualifying themselves as the right type of user. So this goes back to what we discussed in terms of measuring macro conversions, so the actual touch point at the very end of that user journey, but something like a brochure download, that would be a micro conversion. So still adds a huge amount of value, and it should always be tracked when we start thinking about GA4 and some of the big changes that are coming up. So let's just focus in on the key benefits of creating a measurement plan. So I think one of the most important ones is that it creates a really clear scope of works for all members of the team to focus in on. It just means that if you're working across different departments, everyone can be united towards one goal and have a clear understanding of what KPIs and what metrics need to be met in order to meet your overall objectives. It also allows you to create a constant measurement of success. I think a lot of the time what we find is there can be a lot of variance, especially when websites are getting regularly updated. What you can find sometimes is your website becomes cluttered or your means of measurement becomes cluttered, which kind of waters down the overall impact of whatever changes you put onto your website have. So it allows you to always have that key focus. And if you feel like maybe your website's getting a little bit too cluttered, you can always come back to your measurement plan and align it with those goals to make sure that everything is kind of in line with one another. And then also in terms of monitoring the GA4 metrics, I think the biggest thing that's useful with the measurement plan is it links up GA4 and all your analytical data to stuff that's actually meaningful when it comes to your business objectives. So it kind of gives you a very kind of clear understanding of how you can make changes on your website, which really boost your overall performance as a business. So let's move on to the platform migration over to GA4. So when you're getting set up on GA4, one of the first things that you'll need to do is to install a script onto your site, and that's onto every single page. The main reason for this is to make sure that we can track users no matter what page they're on your website. Now, I think one of the main things that we've noticed is that GA4 Wizard is a useful tool to get you started on GA4 in terms of getting everything set up. There's a couple of things which are often kind of forgotten about when it comes to the GA4 Wizard and the setup. Just to kind of take a quick step back, the Wizard is set up to help you migrate from Universal Analytics over to GA4, but one of the main drawbacks to it is it still relies on the old script that's set up within Universal Analytics. Now, the problem with that is once we get to July 1st, we may be in a position where that old script doesn't work. So what we would also always say is make sure that you look at it with a really fine kind of magnifying glass. Look into your GA4 setup with real precision, because what you can find is that a lot of the things that are mentioned within a GA4 Wizard aren't really best practice. And we will get onto that shortly. There's a couple of examples that are coming up which will kind of bring that to light. But before we get into that, what you want to do is double check that the GA4 tags or scripts are installed on your website. So in-house, what we use is a tool called Google Tag Assistant. It's just an extension that you can download onto your browser, and it helps you validate, diagnose, and troubleshoot any issues that you've got with your setup on your website. So it's an industry standard tool that's used. It's super simple to set up, and it can be used to look at things like GA4, but also different kind of tags like Google Ads and a few others as well. So to use this, first of all, you have to install it. All you do is just Google that, type in Google Tag Assistant into your browser, download the extension, and then additionally, before you get started, I should have went back to this one, but you need to have a look at your measurement ID on GA4. To do this, you need to log into your GA4 account, go into the admin section, click on data streams, and then when you select your data stream, you can see in the red box here, I've blocked this one out, but there is a measurement ID there. All you have to do is copy that, because that's what you're looking for when you use the Google Tag Assistant tool. So let's see if this loads up. Give me 2 moments. Yeah, so there should be a video playing at the moment to give you a bit of an insight into how this works. So all you have to do is click on the extension, click on enable. When you refresh your page on the website, what will happen is once you click back onto the tool again, you'll get a list of different tags that pop up on the screen. And all you're looking for is a reference to your measurement ID on this list. If you see that on your homepage, then that's great. It's a good sign to say that it's set up. But what I would also say is go through a few different pages on your website, like your About Us page, maybe your blog pages. And if it continuously pops up, then you can be sure that the tag is set up correctly on your website. So pretty straightforward there. So in terms of the next tip that I want to touch base on, that's following our best practices. So at Tag, we formulated a 26-point optimization plan, more or less an audit that helps our clients get the best out of Google Analytics. And today we're going to touch base on a couple of these that you can go away after this webinar and put into practice yourself. So the first one that we have here is maximizing your data retention. So GA4 as a whole, always shouts about being super sort of privacy centric. So as a standard, Google has set up data retention to 2 months as standard. Now, the key problem with that is if you have, let's say, a 3-month remarketing audience, it will cap out at 2 months and you won't get any data from that point onwards. Now, what we've been saying to our clients is the best thing that you can do is actually go onto GA4 and change this with a few clicks, to be honest. It doesn't take too much. So when you go into your GA4 account, all you do is click on configure, then you go to the admin page, and just on the left-hand side here, there'll be a button that says data settings, and then data retention. And it's as simple as just a drop down here. You can see at the minute we've got it set to, I believe, 14 months by the looks of it. But generally speaking, a lot of the clients that we've been working with, it's set to 2. So just hop in here, change that to 14 months and click save. And that will save you any headaches further down the line when it comes to your remarketing audiences. And then another thing to take a note of, and this somewhat leans into kind of universal analytics to an extent, and the fact it's been running for so long. But one of the common themes that we have seen across the board on GA4 recently is that the user permissions section isn't set up to best practice. So what we mean by that is we should also always have at least 2 admins on your GA4 account. One of these can be an individual, but one has to be a shared account. The main reason for this is if anyone leaves a company that's got admin access, and let's say you delete their emails and you can't get access to that anymore, if you don't have a shared account, the problem that you may come across is that you lose access to GA4 altogether. So what we would always say is make sure you've got at least 1 shared email. And in terms of other admins, that's up to yourself, but generally we say 2 max. So in order to update this, what I've just blocked out some of the emails that we've got here, but it's a very similar process to the last example that we took you through. So just jump onto GA4, you go to the admin section and click on property access management, and from there you can add edit and remove users as much as you want. I think it's a really good thing to note as well. What you may find is there'll be emails on there that you're not particularly familiar with. And sometimes that can be a case that someone's been given access to maybe 3 years ago, and they should have had their access revoked, but they haven't done so. So definitely something to watch out for and to make sure that it's up to date so that you don't have any issues going forward. So that brings us on to the next element of this webinar, which is getting started on GA4. Now, generally speaking, we've touched base a little bit on this. The standard reporting setup has changed quite significantly from Universal Analytics, moving over to GA4. So on Universal Analytics, there was around about 30 or so standard reports that were set up. A lot of the time, not very many of these were being used. Personally, I would use maybe 6 to 8 of them maximum. It's the fact that the system had been running for so long, and just over the years they'd added on one report after another, and it got to a point that if you're new to Universal Analytics, the problem that you have is you don't really know where to start. It's super complicated, and a lot of the time you can lose interest faster than you can kind of pick up all of the different reports that are in there. Now, the great thing with GA4 is it's much more simplified. They have a lifecycle report section, which is split up into around about 6 reports compared to the 30 that we had before. The other thing to note, and this is something that I personally kind of got caught out with when I first had to look at GA4. It's very different and it's quite hard to navigate when you first get started. But to kind of reassure you and kind of give you an insight into it is the fact that it is very kind of standardized. There's 2 key different types of template that are used across Google Analytics. The first one being the cards report, which is kind of just a top level summary of everything that is available within each section of the lifecycle report. And if you want to get more granular, there is a more detailed section which has a table element associated with it, which is what we're going to focus on today, because I think that's where you can get most of your insights from. So yeah, we've touched base on the report. We've kind of skipped a slide there, so I'll hop over this part and then get straight into the reports themselves. So in terms of the detailed reporting, what you'll find is there's a few different pieces of functionality that's pulled together across the reports. So no matter what view you look at across the life cycle, whether it be acquisition, monetization, retention, whatever it may be, it follows the same kind of functionality within the detailed reporting. So you have an ad comparison feature, ad filter, primary dimensions that you can change. You've also got a search feature, which is really useful for narrowing down on specific bits of data that you want to look at. You've also got a secondary dimension, and then event count and conversion toggles. Now, it may seem like a lot, but I'm going to take you through each of these just to give you a bit of an insight on how they're used, and you'll soon find out that it's super easy to use, and it's just about layering these in a way that suits you best to get the outcomes that you want. So first of all, the ad comparison feature, it allows you to compare different subsets of data side by side. So in the example that I've got on screen at the moment, what I've done is I've set up 2 different subsets of data. One of them pulling in people that live in the United Kingdom that have visited the website, and also people from India that have visited the website. And what you can see here is on these reports, it just color codes everything, so it's super easy to see. We have all users at the very top here. We have users from United Kingdom second, and then at the very bottom here, we have users from India. So super easy to look at. You can see this at this cards level, but also when you go into the more detailed views, you'll see a very similar breakdown there. So useful for understanding the differences between different kind of dimensions that you have set up. The thing that I should note here is that I've used country as my dimension, but there's hundreds of different examples that you can use. So if you wanted to go by city or by source or medium or any kind of dimension, and it's super easy to set this up. So the next part is adding a filter. So it has a similar setup to the ad comparison feature, but the key thing that differs here is it's just focusing in on a specific type of data based on a certain criteria. So what I've done on this example is I've set up my dimension to be just Google only. So we're comparison United Kingdom visitors, Indian visitors together, and then we're using a filter on top of that to look at just people that have visited the site via Google. The next one that we have here is the primary dimension feature. And to be fair, this is probably one of the main measurement points used in every single report that you use. It does vary from report to report. For instance, in the event section, it's different to the acquisition report, for instance. But the main thing to take note of is when you click on the grey arrow, you can select your preferred dimension within that specific report. So in the example here, I have default channel groups set up, but if you wanted to get a deeper insight into specifically what source and medium each user comes from, you can just click on the grey arrow and select the one that suits you best. Generally for us, tags, something like source medium comes in really handy to be able to understand not only where the traffic's coming from, but what type of traffic it is. But yeah, there's a few different examples there that you can use. I'd definitely advise jumping in, playing around with the system as much as you can, get the most out of it. And then we also have the search feature. This is probably something that you can use most frequently on the platform. So in the example prior, you can see we have things like organic search, direct, and we have email. But if you wanted to filter it by a specific example there without using the filter at the top, all you have to do is type in the exact match that you have. And as you can see here, I've typed in organic search and I get this result here. Works very similarly to the filter feature, but it's, I guess, a bit easier to use in the sense that it doesn't take quite as much time to set up. And then we have a secondary dimension feature. Works very similarly to the primary dimension, but what you can do is layer a secondary dimension on top of that. So a good example of this might be if you were to use your primary dimension as country, but then you wanted to break that down even further to look at city, for instance. So you can see in this example here, all I've done within the report is click on the blue cross to the right of the primary dimension column, filter by city, and then what you see is a breakdown beside that. So can come in really useful if you're not quite getting as much data as you want out of your reports. And yeah, this is a feature that I lean on quite heavily to get strong insights. And then finally, we have the events and conversions toggle. Now, what you'll tend to see in this section is on a day-to-day basis, once your conversions are set up, you'll be focusing in more here on the conversions tab. But if there's anything specifically you want to look at in terms of event count, let's say maybe you want to understand scroll depth on a blog page, what you can do is just click on this little grey arrow that's pointing down the way and select the event that's relative to the data that you want to see. An example that I've got here, I've just filtered by request a proposal under the conversions tab, which means that I'll focus in purely on that conversion as opposed to maybe 3 or 4 that might be on the back end of GA4. It just means rather than getting all of your conversion data, you can focus in on what matters most to you in that particular search. And yeah, I've said it once and I'll say it again. On July 1st, Universal Analytics is going to be stopping processing all hits. So if you haven't already moved over, then now is a really good time to do so. I would argue that it's really about starting as soon as possible. We've now got less than 50 days until the switch happens, and we're now getting into the realm of a situation where if you move over too late, things that you might miss out on is data collection. So being able to actually build reports within GA4 well in advance of that switch. The last thing you want is to make the switch and not have any data to rely on day one. The other thing to note, which I think is super important, is audiences. You also want to be able to move over to GA4 as soon as possible so you can build meaningful audiences on that platform before Universal Analytics disappears. If you don't move over, the chances are you won't have time to build really important audiences like remarketing, abandoned basket, all these kind of elements that are super useful. You want to be moving over to GA4 to make that change as quick as possible. And I guess the other point to take note of is there's been a lot of reporting improvements. We've went through some of it today, but I think the main thing to note is the earlier you get onto GA4, the more upskilling that you can do on platform and getting familiar with the layout. It is a big change compared to Universal Analytics, but it doesn't take long to pick up. So the sooner that you move over, the more prepared you'll be in the end. And then finally, we also have things like machine learning that's getting leveraged over in GA4. This is used for when, someone can't be tracked. Let's say maybe they've opted out of cookies, but there's enough machine learning there to stitch their session together in a way that can be reported on within Google Analytics. Machine learning steps in there and kind of it closes any gaps that third-party cookies may be leaving behind. But yeah, that's a bit of a summary there. And that brings us on to our Q&A session. Good stuff, yeah. So the first question we have here, will Google push back on their go live date for Google Analytics 4? So it's a very good question. I think one of the main things to note here is there has been a couple of times where Google has pushed back on the date. But what we've noticed now is that Google seems dead certain that this is going to happen on July 1st. So I wouldn't be holding my breath for it to get pushed back any further, for sure. Is there any reason why, or somewhere I should look at some more, okay, unassigned source. Okay, yeah, so that's a good example there. So generally speaking, when we have things like any traffic that's pulling through as an unassigned source, what you might have to have a look at is UTMs and make sure that they're set up correctly. So the best way to think about it is it's a tagging method that's used to identify users that are landing on your website. So what may be happening there is, for whatever reason, your UTMs are falling off. You may even have a case where they're not set up at all. So a good example might be for a Google Ads campaign. We have our UTM set up in a way that it notifies that it's a Google source, but also that the type of it is a paid ad. So what I would say there is go back and have a look at your UTM structure and double check that that's all set up correctly, because I think that's more than likely the problem. The only other thing to note there is direct none and unassigned source. Those are two sources that are set up for when it can't be attributed to anything. So if your direct none is really high as well, then have a look into that and try and bring those numbers down. Can we leave GA4 update to Google? So admittedly, I would say you have to be proactive on this one. The main reason behind that is the wizard that has been offered so far. It does help to an extent, but it doesn't follow best practices. So I would also always say try and take responsibility for this yourself. With GA4, it is a platform that naturally tries to get the end user to take more action. You know, things like exploration reports, which we haven't touched base here, but in a nutshell, GA4 wants you to take more of a hands-on approach to managing your data. So yeah, I would say get someone to have a look at that. We have a team internally that can help out with that. We can run an audit on the account, or if you're completely new to GA4 and need some help setting that up, we also have a service for that too. So yeah, I think that's everything for us. If you've got any questions, feel free to give me an email, stuart@tagdigital.co.uk. But yeah, that's everything. Thanks.